Evening, friends. Before we step through that frost-edged doorway into an 1800s American Christmas, let me paint you a picture. It's barely dawn, the house is cold enough to see your breath, and the big celebration you're about to witness involves a single orange, some hand-carved wooden toys, and a dinner that took 3 days to prepare. No electric lights, no last-minute Amazon orders, no mountains of wrapping paper destined for the landfill, just firelight, hard work, and the kind of intentional celebration that makes our modern chaos look like we're doing it wrong. And here's the thing. You're about to step into a world where Christmas wasn't yet the commercial juggernaut we know today. In many homes, especially before the 1850s, December 25th was just another workday. Good thing this isn't your life, because you'd probably spend the morning milking cows before you ever saw a stocking. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you are in the comments. I love seeing where this journey reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in darkness. Not the comfortable darkness of a modern bedroom where streetlights leak through blinds and your phone glows on the nightstand, but the complete, enveloping blackness of a world lit only by fire and candle. It's Christmas morning, 1850-something, and you're in a 2-story frame house somewhere in rural Pennsylvania or Massachusetts or Ohio. One of those middle-class homes where father works as a merchant or a clerk, and mother manages a household that runs like a small factory. The first sound you hear isn't an alarm, it's the creak of floorboards in the room above you. Father, rising in the pre-dawn cold to kindle the fires. Then comes the whisper scrape of the tinderbox, the soft curse when the first spark won't catch, and finally, the papery crackle of birch bark catching flame. Within minutes, you hear him moving down the narrow stairs, his footsteps careful in the darkness, and then the heavier sounds of him working in the kitchen, the clang of the iron stove door, the thud of split wood, the slow build of heat that will, eventually, maybe in an hour, take the killing edge off the cold. You pull the quilts tighter. They're heavy, layered things. A wool blanket mother made from last year's shearing, a patchwork quilt her own mother stitched before the war, and on top, a coverlet so thick you can barely move under its weight. Frost has painted the inside of your window in feathered patterns, and when you exhale, your breath hangs visible in the dim light now seeping through the glass. It's maybe 5:30 in the morning. The sun won't rise for another hour. Here's what you need to understand. Christmas morning in the 1800s doesn't begin with children thundering downstairs at dawn. It begins with work. Cold, necessary, unglamorous work. Father needs those fires burning before anyone else rises, because a December morning in a wooden house can drop to freezing inside. Mother will be up within minutes to start the day's cooking, a marathon that began 2 days ago and won't end until tonight's supper dishes are washed. And the children? They'll wait. Patience was a virtue you learned early in the 19th century, mostly because you had no choice. You hear mother's footsteps now, lighter than father's, moving with the efficiency of someone who's been running this particular household operation for 20 years. There's a murmur of voices from the kitchen, low, private, the kind of conversation married people have in the stolen moments before children wake. You catch fragments, something about the goose, whether there's enough butter, a reminder to bring up the preserves from the cellar. The house begins to warm. You can feel it in tiny increments, the way your nose stops aching, the way you can flex your fingers without pain. Outside, the world is silent in that peculiar way only snow can create. A muffling so complete, it feels like the earth itself is holding its breath. No cars, no planes overhead, no distant hum of machinery. just the occasional crack of a branch giving way under ice, or the lonely crow of a rooster from a neighbour's yard 3 houses down. This is the part modern tellings of Victorian Christmas skip over. The cold, slow, work-filled hours that precede any celebration. You don't leap from bed into a winter wonderland. You ease into the day, layer by careful layer, fire by fire, task by task. Christmas in the 1800s was never about instant gratification. It was about delayed reward, about earning joy through preparation and patience. Historians still argue about when the modern American Christmas actually emerged. Some point to the 1820s and Washington Irving's nostalgic essays about English Christmas traditions that Americans had largely forgotten. Others credit Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol in 1843, which was reprinted in American newspapers and magazines almost immediately. But the truth is messier and slower. Christmas evolved differently in different regions, different classes, different religious communities. Your Puritan ancestors in Massachusetts actually outlawed Christmas celebrations in the 1600s, considering them too Catholic, too pagan, too festive. It wasn't until the 1850s and 60s that Christmas began to look like something we'd recognize. And even then, it was a pale shadow of our current excess. You hear the children stirring now. There are 3 of them in this household. Mary, age 10, Thomas, age 7, and little Catherine, just 4. They share the upstairs bedroom, sleeping 2 to a bed for warmth, and you can hear their whispered excitement, quickly shushed by Mary, who's old enough to know that good behaviour on Christmas morning might mean an extra slice of pie at dinner. The sky is greying now, that slow winter dawn that never quite commits to brightness. You can see the shapes of furniture emerging from darkness, the washstand with its frozen pitcher of water, the chest where your clothes are kept, the sampler mother embroidered hanging on the wall with its stern reminder about idle hands. There's a legitimate debate among historians about whether ordinary American families felt Christmas as a sacred day or simply as a welcome break from labour. Diaries from the period suggest both. Farmers grateful for a rare day without fieldwork, but also devout families who spent the morning in church before any celebration began. Father appears in your doorway. "Time to rise," he says, and his voice is warm but firm. This is Christmas, yes, but it's also a work day in the sense that the animals still need feeding, the fires still need tending, and breakfast still needs cooking. You dress in the cold, your fingers clumsy on buttons, and make your way downstairs where the kitchen is finally, blessedly warm, and Mother is already elbow-deep in flour, and the day, the real day, is about to begin. The stockings are hanging by the kitchen hearth, not the parlor fireplace. This detail matters. In the 1800s, the kitchen was the heart of the house in winter, the only room kept consistently warm, and St. Nicholas, or Father Christmas, or Kris Kringle, depending on your family's particular tradition, was practical enough to know where children would actually be on a December morning. You watch as the children approach, their excitement barely contained behind properly trained faces. Victorian child-rearing manuals were obsessed with self-control, with teaching young people to moderate their emotions, to receive gifts with quiet gratitude rather than squealing chaos. So Mary, Thomas, and Catherine approach the hearth with careful steps, hands clasped, waiting for Mother's nod of permission before they reach for the lumpy wool stockings hung from iron hooks. Here's what you need to understand about Christmas stockings in the 1800s. They were actually stockings, not the oversized felt decorations we buy at Target, but real, everyday wool stockings that children wore throughout the winter. On Christmas Eve, they'd hang their cleanest pair by the fire, and by morning, if they'd been good, if Father could afford it, if the harvest had been decent, those stockings would be filled with a very specific set of small treasures. Thomas gets his stocking first, being the eldest boy. He sits on the hearthstones and upends it carefully. Out tumbles, One orange, wrapped in tissue paper that Mother has saved and reused for 3 Christmases now. A handful of black walnuts still in their shells. 2 peppermint sticks, each about the length of your finger, hand-pulled by the confectioner in town. A small bag of marbles, clay ones, not the fancy glass kind. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a scrap of flannel, a carved wooden horse about 3 inches tall, its mane and tail etched in careful detail, its legs sturdy enough to survive years of play.
Father made that horse. You know because you saw him whittling it by lamplight 3 weeks ago, stealing an hour after supper to work the soft pine with his pocket knife. His hands moving with the kind of practiced ease that comes from a childhood spent carving your own toys because there was no other option. He'll never mention that he made it. The children will assume it came from St. Nicholas, and that's fine. That's the magic of it. But you, watching from your time traveler's perch, can see the pride in his eyes as Thomas holds up the horse and examines it with genuine wonder. Mary's stocking yields similar treasures, but with feminine modifications. A small doll carved from a clothespin, wearing a dress Mother sewed from scrap fabric. A string of glass beads, nothing fancy, but they catch the firelight like tiny trapped suns. Her own orange, her own peppermints, her own walnuts. And at the bottom, a small blank journal with a pencil tied to it with string. Because Mary can read and write, a privilege Father is fiercely proud of, and he believes that young ladies should practice their penmanship. Little Catherine, at 4, receives the simplest haul. An orange cut into quarters so she won't choke. A small rag doll that Mother sewed. And 3 walnuts already cracked because her teeth aren't strong enough yet for the shells. She's delighted anyway, clutching the doll and crooning to it, rocking it in her arms with the unself-conscious joy of a child who doesn't yet know that the best toys are supposed to cost money. Here's what historians debate. Was the orange tradition German, Dutch, or English? Different sources claim different origins, but by the 1850s, the Christmas orange had become nearly universal in American homes that could afford it. And afford is the key word. A single orange in winter could cost the equivalent of a day's wages for a laborer. Oranges didn't grow in the northern states. They had to be shipped from Florida or the Caribbean or even the Mediterranean, transported carefully in straw-lined crates, sold at premium prices in city markets. For a middle-class family like this one, buying 4 oranges for Christmas was a genuine extravagance, the kind of purchase Mother had been saving for since September. But that orange represented more than exotic fruit. It represented the expanding reach of American commerce, the railroad and steamship networks that were knitting the country together, the slow but steady growth of a market economy that could bring tropical fruit to a Pennsylvania winter. A child biting into a Christmas orange in 1855 was tasting globalization before the word existed. You watch as the children examine their treasures, trading marbles, comparing dolls, carefully peeling their oranges so the rind comes off in long, unbroken spirals. There's a specific kind of joy here that's hard to explain to modern eyes. It's not the frenzied dopamine hit of unwrapping dozens of presents. It's slower, deeper, more wonder-filled. Each item gets examined, appreciated, discussed. The wooden horse gets a name, Thunder, naturally. The doll gets tucked into Catherine's pinafore pocket. The journal gets opened and immediately closed again because Mary wants to save it to make the first entry perfect. Mother watches from the stove where she's already working on breakfast. Porridge with molasses, fried ham if you're lucky, bread toasted on a long fork held directly over the fire. Father smokes his pipe by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street, and you can see his face soften as he watches the children in the reflection of the glass. This is the gift exchange 1800s style. No mountain of packages, no trash bags full of wrapping paper, just a few small, carefully chosen items, most of them handmade, all of them treasured. And somehow, watching Catherine sing to her rag doll,
watching Thomas race his wooden horse across the floorboards, watching Mary reverently hold her new journal. You suspect they might be getting something we've lost. The kitchen smells like a forest caught fire inside a spice merchant's shop. Pine from the kindling, cinnamon from the pot of wassail simmering on the back of the stove, roasting meat and burnt sugar, and something yeasty and rich that must be the bread dough rising in a bowl near the heat. Mother moves through this aromatic chaos like a general commanding troops, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hair tucked under a cap, her face flushed from heat and effort, and the simple satisfaction of orchestrating something complicated. You need to understand, the Christmas feast didn't begin this morning. It began 3 days ago. On December 22nd, Mother took inventory of the cellar. She counted preserved fruits in their sealed jars, checked the barrel of apples for rot, examined the strings of dried herbs hanging from the beams, calculated whether there was enough butter, enough sugar, enough flour for what she had planned. Christmas dinner in the 1800s wasn't something you could improvise. It required planning, purchasing, and preparation that would exhaust a modern chef. On the 23rd, Father brought home the goose. It cost him $2, nearly a week's wages, from a farmer at the town market. The bird was massive, 12 pounds at least, and Mother immediately set to work plucking the last of its feathers, saving them carefully for pillow stuffing. Nothing was wasted. The feet went into stock. The liver went into a separate pot for pâté. Even the fat was precious, to be rendered and saved for cooking throughout January. Yesterday, Christmas Eve, Mother and Mary worked together for hours. They made mince pies, real mince, with chopped beef mixed with apples, raisins, currants, and so much spice that the whole house smelled like a merchant ship from the Indies. They prepared the plum pudding, mixing suet and flour and dried fruit into a dense batter that got wrapped in cloth and boiled for 5 hours. They peeled potatoes and turnips and parsnips, storing them in cold water overnight. They made cranberry sauce, sweetened with precious sugar, tart enough to make your teeth ache. And now, Christmas morning, Mother is bringing it all together. The goose has been in the oven since 5:30, roasting slowly in a heavy iron pan, its skin already crisping to deep gold, its fat collecting in the bottom of the pan to be saved and treasured. She bastes it every half hour, using a long spoon to drizzle the fat back over the bird, keeping it moist. The smell is overwhelming, savory and rich and somehow primal, the smell of meat and fire that humans have been chasing for 10,000 years. On the stovetop, multiple pots compete for space. There's the wassail, made from ale spiced with ginger and nutmeg, sweetened with sugar, meant to be drunk warm from small cups. There's oyster stew simmering in cream, a dish that seems exotic now but was common then. Oysters were cheap in the 1800s, shipped inland on ice, considered almost peasant food before we over-harvested them nearly to extinction. There's boiled potatoes and mashed turnips and creamed onions, each in their own pot, each requiring attention and stirring and timing. Mary helps where she can, setting the table in the dining room with the good plates, real china, not tin, brought out maybe 3 times a year. She folds napkins into careful triangles and places them just so. Thomas has been dispatched to the cellar for preserves and pickles, those jewel-toned jars of summer bounty, spiced peaches, bread and butter pickles, green beans put up in brine. Little Catherine is supposed to stay out of the way but keeps sneaking tastes of everything, earning gentle swats from Mother's wooden spoon. Here's a detail that gets lost in nostalgic retellings. Cooking an 1800s Christmas dinner was physically brutal work. The wood stove had to be constantly fed and monitored because it had no temperature controls. Too hot and everything burned, too cool and nothing cooked through. You couldn't just set a timer and walk away. You had to stay vigilant, checking, stirring, adjusting, your face red from heat, your arms aching from lifting heavy pots,
your back protesting from hours of standing on a stone floor. And Mother did this while wearing a dress with a corset underneath, layers of petticoats, and a full apron over everything. Victorian women's clothing was designed for modesty and silhouette, not functionality. Cooking in it was like trying to run a marathon in formal wear. But here's the thing, and this is where the historical record gets interesting. Women's diaries from the period suggest they took fierce pride in this work. Sarah Josepha Hale, the editor of Godey's Ladies' Book, basically the Martha Stewart living of the 1800s, wrote extensively about the domestic arts and how a well-run household was its own kind of kingdom, its own sphere of power. Was this internalized oppression, women making the best of limited options? Or genuine satisfaction in skilled work? Historians still argue, and the answer is probably both, depending on the individual woman. By 11 o'clock, the kitchen has reached a crescendo. The goose is out of the oven, resting on a platter, its skin crackling crisp, its meat falling off the bone. The pies are warming. The vegetables are drained and buttered and seasoned. The table is set. Father has changed into his good coat, the one he wears to church and funerals, and the rare fancy dinner. The children have been scrubbed and redressed in their Sunday clothes, and Mother, for just a moment, allows herself to lean against the doorframe and survey her work. A table laden with enough food to feed 8 people, all of it prepared by her hands, all of it testimony to her skill and planning and 3 days of relentless effort. She looks exhausted. She looks proud. She looks like someone who has just fought a small, private war and won.
The parlor is cold. Not uncomfortable. Father lit the fire in here an hour ago, but noticeably cooler than the kitchen. That permanent chill that settles into rooms that aren't used daily. This is the good room, the space reserved for guests and special occasions, and entering it feels like stepping into a different house entirely. The furniture here is more formal. A horsehair sofa that prickles against your legs, 2 upholstered chairs with wooden arms polished to a shine, a small bookshelf holding Father's collection of volumes, a Bible, obviously, but also Shakespeare, Longfellow, some Walter Scott novels, and a well-thumbed copy of A Christmas Carol that gets read aloud every year. There's a piano against one wall, and while Mother can play it, she rarely has time. The wallpaper is patterned with vines and roses, now slightly faded, and the carpet is a turkey red wool that shows every speck of dirt, which is why the children are only allowed in here on special occasions. And today is special, so Mother has decreed that the parlor should be dressed for Christmas. You watch as the family transforms the room through small, careful additions. First come the evergreen boughs, pine and fir that Father cut yesterday from the woodlot at the edge of town. He and Thomas draped them along the mantelpiece, tucking the branches just so, creating a fragrant green garland that drips sap onto the marble in sticky amber beads. The smell is immediately transporting, fresh and sharp and alive, cutting through the stuffiness of winter-closed rooms. Mary and Mother are stringing popcorn. Not the fluffy white kernels we know, those varieties didn't exist yet, but older, smaller, harder corn that pops into compact, creamy yellow shapes. They sit by the window with needle and thread, piercing each kernel carefully, creating long garlands that will be draped across the evergreens. It's tedious work. Mary has already pricked her finger twice, and you can see the tiny spots of blood she keeps trying to hide from Mother. Catherine is supposedly helping by separating cranberries for a second garland, alternating red and white in a pattern. But she keeps eating them and then making faces at how sour they are. No one stops her. It's Christmas. And here's where we need to address the tree debate. In 1850s America, the Christmas tree was a new and somewhat controversial addition to holiday traditions. German immigrants had brought the custom with them, and by the 1840s, it was spreading through Pennsylvania, New York, and other states with large German populations. But many native-born Americans viewed it with suspicion. Wasn't it foreign? Wasn't it wasteful to cut down a whole tree for a few weeks of decoration? Didn't it threaten the good old English tradition of kissing boughs and evergreen garlands? Women's magazines and newspapers ran heated debates. Some declared the Christmas tree a delightful innovation that children loved. Others warned it was a fire hazard, a German affectation, possibly even pagan in origin. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert popularized trees in England in the 1840s, and an illustration of their family gathered around a decorated tree was widely reprinted in American magazines. But even royal endorsement didn't settle the argument. This family doesn't have a tree. Father considers them newfangled and unnecessary. A mother is privately relieved, because where would they even put it? The parlor isn't large, and a tree would dominate the space, drop needles everywhere, and pose a genuine fire risk if they could afford candles for it, got too close to dry branches. So they stick with garlands, with the evergreen boughs, with clusters of holly, carefully handled. Those leaves are vicious, placed in corners where the red berries catch the light. It's not sparse, exactly, but it's restrained, deliberate. The Victorians called this tasteful, and they meant it as a compliment.
Thomas is given the honour of placing the kissing bough. It's a small construction of wire and evergreen branches with a handful of white berries, not mistletoe. That was expensive and hard to find, but a convincing substitute. And ribbons Mother saved from last year's hair bows. It gets hung in the doorway between the parlour and the hall, and tradition dictates that anyone who passes under it owes a kiss to whoever catches them there. Father catches Mother there within minutes, and their quick peck makes the children giggle and groan in equal measure. The room is transformed now. It's still formal, still a bit stiff, but there's warmth to it that wasn't there an hour ago. The green against the burgundy wallpaper, the flicker of firelight catching on popcorn strings, the smell of pine and wood smoke mixing in a way that makes your chest ache with something you can't quite name. Here's what the historical record shows. Americans in the 1800s debated Christmas decorations with the kind of passion we now reserve for political arguments. Should evergreens be used at all, given that they were associated with pagan winter solstice rituals? Was it wasteful to decorate a room that would only be enjoyed for a few weeks? Was the Christmas tree German or English or universal? And underneath all these questions was a deeper anxiety about what Christmas should mean. Sacred or secular, religious or commercial, simple or elaborate. Different families answered differently. Some went all out with decorations that took days to prepare. Others kept Christmas austere, focused on church services and plain meals. This family falls somewhere in the middle. Thoughtful decoration that requires effort but doesn't dominate the day. Beauty that serves a purpose but doesn't become the purpose itself. Mother steps back to examine their work, hands on hips, and allows herself a small, satisfied nod. The parlour looks festive. It looks ready. And more importantly, it looks like a room where family will gather after dinner, where stories will be told, where the day's real meaning, whatever each person decides that meaning is, will quietly reveal itself. The dinner bell doesn't ring at noon. It rings at 2 o'clock, which tells you something important about 1800s American meals. They operated on a different clock. The main meal, what we'd call lunch, was called dinner and happened in the early afternoon when daylight was still strong and the family could gather without burning precious lamp oil. Supper came later, often just bread and cheese and leftovers, a light meal before bed. But today's dinner is anything but light. You take your seat at the table, which has been expanded with 2 extra leaves to accommodate not just the immediate family, but also grandmother, mother's mother, a widow who lives 3 blocks away, and Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher from next door, whose own children have moved west and who would otherwise spend Christmas alone. The table is crowded but not chaotic, every place setting precise, every chair positioned with care. Father stands at the head of the table, and the room falls silent. No one touches their napkin. No one reaches for food. This is the moment, the pause before plenty, and it carries weight. He prays, not a quick, rote blessing, but a real prayer, spoken slowly, with feeling. He thanks God for the harvest, for health, for this home and the people in it. He acknowledges those absent, his own father, dead 5 years now, mother's sister in Ohio, whom they haven't seen in 3 Christmases. He asks for continued blessings in the year to come, for the nation, for their neighbors, for those less fortunate. It's not performative piety. You can hear genuine gratitude in his voice, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how fragile all this is, how quickly illness or failed crops or economic panic could upend everything. The children sit with bowed heads, hands folded, little Catherine swaying slightly but staying quiet. Grandmother dabs at her eyes with a handkerchief. Mrs. Fletcher squeezes her husband's hand. And then father says, "Amen," and the table comes alive. The goose is carved at the table, father wielding the knife with practiced skill, separating legs from breast, slicing the meat into portions that get distributed based on age and gender. The best cuts to guests and grandmother, then father, then mother, then the children in descending order. No one complains about this hierarchy. It's simply how things are done. And then the dishes start moving, passing hand to hand in careful choreography. Oyster stew in a tureen, creamed onions, mashed potatoes whipped with butter and cream, boiled turnips, roasted parsnips caramelized at their edges, cranberry sauce so tart it makes your molars ache, bread stuffing rich with sage and pork sausage, gravy made from the goose drippings and flour and careful patience. You need to understand the flavors here because they're different from modern holiday meals. The goose is richer, gamier than turkey, closer to duck in texture, with dark meat throughout, and a layer of fat that kept it moist during the long roasting. The vegetables are earthier than what we're used to, less sweet, more honest. Turnips that taste like the ground they came from, parsnips with a subtle, spicy bite, potatoes that are fluffy and plain and perfect for soaking up gravy. There's no green bean casserole. That's a 1950s invention. No sweet potato with marshmallows. Marshmallows themselves were a luxury item, made by candy makers, not a pantry staple. The meal is savory, hearty, built around meat and roots, and the preserved fruits that provide occasional bursts of sweetness. Conversation flows in fits and starts. Mr. Fletcher mentions the new railroad extension, and father discusses how it might affect shipping prices. Grandmother reminisces about Christmases from her own childhood, when they were less formal, simpler affairs. Mary carefully cuts her meat into tiny bites, trying to show how grown up she can be. Thomas eats with the focused intensity of a 7-year-old boy who has been waiting for this meal for hours and intends to do it justice. Here's where things get historically interesting. Historians debate how Americans in the 1800s actually experienced holiday meals. Some diaries describe elaborate multi-course affairs that lasted hours. Others mention quick, efficient meals focused on getting food on the table and eaten before it went cold. Class matters here. A wealthy merchant family in Boston might have a completely different Christmas dinner than a farming family in rural Indiana. This middle-class household represents something in between. A special meal, yes, but not so elaborate that it becomes an exhausting production. The mince pies come out while people are still working on their main course. This was typical. Meals weren't strictly coursed like French cuisine. Sweet and savory overlapped, and you might have a bite of pie, then return to your goose, then have more pie. The pies are dense, rich, almost meaty in texture, from the combination of beef and dried fruit and spices that taste like they've traveled from somewhere exotic and impossible. And then the finale, plum pudding. Mother brings it out on a platter, and father, in a rare moment of theatrical flair, pours brandy over it and sets it alight. Blue flames dance across the dark, studded surface for a few seconds before dying out, and the children gasp with delight, and even grandmother smiles. And for just a moment, everyone forgets about the cold outside and the hard work behind this meal and the uncertain year ahead. The pudding is so dense you could use it as a doorstop. It's sweet but not cloying, studded with currants and raisins and candied citrus peel, soaked in brandy and sugar until it's almost sticky. Everyone gets a slice, even the children, though Mother carefully examines Catherine's portion first, checking for the silver coin she baked into the pudding. An old tradition that whoever finds it will have good luck in the coming year. Thomas finds it. He holds it up, triumphant, a 3-penny piece black with tarnish and pudding, and everyone applauds, and he tucks it into his pocket with the kind of solemnity that suggests he believes absolutely in its power. By 3:30, the meal is finished. Plates are scraped clean. Bellies are full to the point of discomfort. The table looks like a battlefield, and Mother is already mentally preparing for the hours of washing up ahead. But right now, in this moment, everyone just sits, full, together, content. The afternoon settles over the house like a quilt. The frantic energy of cooking and eating and celebrating has dissipated, replaced by something slower, heavier, warmer. This is the quiet time, the hours between dinner and supper, when no one has any particular obligations, and the luxury of simply resting feels almost decadent. You follow the family back to the parlor, where the fire has been built up again, and the evergreen garlands still scent the air with pine. Mother sinks into the sofa with a small sigh that she tries to stifle. She's been on her feet since before dawn, and even Victorian propriety can't quite mask her exhaustion. Father takes his chair by the window, fills his pipe, and reaches for the book on the side table. "Shall we have a story?" he asks, though it's not really a question. This is tradition. Christmas afternoon means reading aloud, and Father takes this responsibility seriously. He opens the book, not A Christmas Carol, though that's been read so many times the spine is cracked, but the Sketchbook by Washington Irving, a collection that includes stories about old English Christmases that probably never actually existed, but that Americans in the 1850s found irresistibly charming. Father's voice is deep and steady, and he reads without affectation, letting the words do their own work. The children arrange themselves around the room. Mary sits near Mother on the sofa, her new journal in her lap, occasionally jotting down a word or phrase from the story. Thomas stretches out on the carpet near the fire, his wooden horse clutched in one hand, making it gallop silently across the pattern in the rug. Catherine curls up in Mother's lap, her ragdoll tucked under her chin, fighting sleep but losing the battle. This is what Christmas afternoons looked like in the 1800s. Reading, drowsing, occasionally talking, but mostly just being together in the same room. No television, no phones to scroll through, no individual entertainment options that fragment the family into separate corners. Just the sound of Father's voice, the crackle of the fire, the tick of the hall clock marking time. Here's something that gets lost in modern retellings. 19th century Americans read aloud constantly. It was the primary form of home entertainment. Literacy rates were rising, and books were becoming cheaper, and reading aloud was both education and amusement. Families would spend entire evenings this way, working through novels chapter by chapter, sharing newspapers and magazines, making literature a communal experience rather than a solitary one. And the content mattered. What families chose to read aloud on Christmas said something about their values. Religious families might read scripture or devotional texts. More secular households might read Dickens or poetry or the latest popular novels. This family is reading Irving, which tells you they value a certain kind of genteel nostalgia, a yearning for merry old England that probably never existed, but that American middle-class families found deeply appealing. Mother has pulled out her knitting, because Victorian women were only allowed to sit idle in very specific circumstances,
and Christmas afternoon apparently wasn't one of them. Her needles click a steady rhythm as Father reads, and you watch as a sock slowly takes shape, row by row. She's knitting by feel, barely looking at her work, her hands moving with the automatic precision of someone who's been doing this since childhood. Historians debate whether we should romanticize this kind of domestic scene. On one hand, it looks peaceful, even idyllic, a family together, engaged in wholesome activities, no one staring at screens or arguing about politics. On the other hand, Mother hasn't stopped working all day. Even now, even while resting, her hands are productive. The ideology of separate spheres, men in the public world, women in the domestic, meant that women's work was never done, that even leisure time was supposed to be useful. But watch Mother's face. She looks content? Tired, certainly, but there's a softness around her eyes, a small smile playing at her lips as she listens to the story. Maybe the question isn't, was this oppressive? But what did individual women make of their circumstances? And the answer, as always, is complicated. Catherine has fallen asleep, her breath slowing, her small body going heavy in Mother's lap. Father reads on, his voice dropping slightly in volume, now that his youngest listener is gone. He reaches a section about a Christmas game, Snapdragon, where you try to pluck raisins from a bowl of flaming brandy without burning your fingers, and Thomas perks up. "Can we play that?" he asks. "Absolutely not," Mother says firmly, without missing a stitch in her knitting. "I have no interest in doctoring burnt fingers tonight." Thomas subsides, only slightly disappointed. He returns to his horse, making it leap over the fire irons, across the hearth, into imaginary adventures. The winter light is fading now, that early darkness that descends on December afternoons and makes 4 o'clock feel like twilight. Father lights the lamp on the side table, carefully using a long match, adjusting the wick until it burns steady and bright. The room now has 2 sources of light, firelight from below, golden and flickering, and lamplight from above, steadier but still softer than anything electric could produce. This is the peak of the day, though no one would articulate it as such. This is the moment when all the preparation, all the cooking, all the effort has condensed into simple presence. No one is performing. No one is trying to make memories. They're just here, together, in the warm glow of fire and lamp, and the peculiar intimacy that comes from sharing space without needing to fill it with constant noise. Father finishes the chapter and closes the book. "Shall I continue?" he asks. "Perhaps later," Mother says softly. "I think we could all use a few moments of quiet." And so they sit. The clock ticks. The fire pops. Catherine snores softly, and outside, through the frost-painted window, snow begins to fall again. Small, determined flakes that catch the lamplight like stars falling to earth. By 5 o'clock, the house has entered its final act. The short winter day is nearly finished, darkness pressing against the windows like something solid, and the family is gathering itself for the evening's last rituals. Supper is cold leftovers, sliced goose on bread, a bit of cranberry sauce, some cheese, a handful of nuts cracked with the iron nutcracker that Thomas wields with great seriousness. No one is particularly hungry after the afternoon's feast, but eating together marks the transition from afternoon to evening, from Christmas Day to Christmas night. The dishes are washed quickly, everyone helping, even Father, who usually stays clear of kitchen work, but who on Christmas makes an exception. It's efficient and practiced, this choreography of scraping and washing and drying and putting away. The good china gets carefully wrapped in cloth and returned to the high shelf. The serving dishes get stacked in the pantry. The kitchen, which has been the engine of the day's celebration, is slowly restored to its usual order. And then the candles. You watch as Mother brings out the good beeswax candles.
Not the tallow ones used daily, which smoke and smell like rendered animal fat, but pure beeswax that burns clean and sweet. She places them strategically, 2 on the mantel in the parlor, 1 on the piano, 1 on the side table near Father's chair, 2 more on the dining table. They're lit one by one, each flame catching and steadying, each adding its small golden glow to the gathering darkness. This is expensive. Beeswax candles cost money, and burning multiple candles at once is a luxury that the household budget normally doesn't allow. But this is Christmas night, and some extravagances are worth it. The family gathers in the parlor for the last time today. Grandmother has gone home, bundled against the cold, with Father walking her the 3 blocks to make sure she arrives safely. The Fletchers left hours ago. It's just the 5 of them now. Father, Mother, Mary, Thomas and Catherine. And the house feels simultaneously larger and more intimate without guests. Father sits at the piano. This might surprise you. Victorian masculinity included piano playing as an acceptable accomplishment for educated men, and his fingers find the keys with only a moment's hesitation. He plays by ear, no sheet music, the old hymns and carols that everyone knows by heart. They sing, not formally, not with any particular attention to harmony or pitch, just sing. Hark the herald angels sing, O come all ye faithful, Silent Night, which is relatively new. It was only written in 1818, but has already spread across America and become part of the standard repertoire. Mother's voice is clear and true. Mary tries to hit the high notes and mostly succeeds. Thomas bellows with enthusiasm rather than accuracy. Catherine mumbles along with whatever words she can remember. This is how Christmas ended in the 1800s for many American families. Gathered around the piano or harmonium, or simply standing together, singing the old songs that connected them to something larger than themselves. Whether you view these songs as expressions of deep faith or simply cultural tradition, they served the same function, marking the day as sacred, as set apart, as meaningful. Historians note that carol singing became increasingly popular in America during the mid-1800s, part of the broader revival of Christmas traditions. Churches encouraged it. Hymnals were published specifically for the Christmas season, and families like this one, who might not be particularly devout the rest of the year, still felt the pull of those old melodies on Christmas night. Between songs, Father reads from the Bible, not the entire nativity story, which they heard at church this morning, but selected verses. Luke chapter 2, the shepherds and the angels. Matthew chapter 2, the wise men. He reads slowly, letting the familiar words settle into the candlelit room. And even though everyone has heard these passages dozens of times, they still carry weight, still matter. The candles are burning low now, some of them already guttering, their wicks drowning in pooled wax. The fire in the hearth has collapsed into glowing coals. The room is warm but not hot, comfortable but not cloying, and there's a sense of winding down, of completion, of the day reaching its natural end. Mother speaks quietly. Children, it's time. They know what this means. Bedtime. No protests, not tonight. They're exhausted from excitement and food and the long, full day. They kiss Father, then Mother, then shuffle toward the stairs. Mary carries Catherine, who's already half asleep. Thomas clutches his wooden horse. Their footsteps creak on the stairs, fading into the darkness above. And then it's just Mother and Father, sitting together in the candlelit parlor, the day finally, truly finished. They don't speak at first. Father reaches over and takes Mother's hand, and she leans against his shoulder, and they watch the fire die. This is the part we never see in Currier and Ives' prints or nostalgic paintings. The quiet exhaustion, the satisfaction mixed with relief that it's over, that it went well, that no one got sick or burned or injured, that the food was enough, that the children seemed happy.
Christmas in the 1800s was work, exhausting, expensive, emotionally demanding work. And this moment of stillness at the end is earned. Father breaks the silence. "It was a good Christmas," he says. Mother smiles in the darkness. "It was," she agrees.
Outside, the snow has stopped. The street is silent. The neighbors' houses show only a few lit windows now, other families also winding down, also reaching the end of their own Christmas days. Tomorrow will be an ordinary day. Back to work for Father, back to the endless household tasks for Mother, back to lessons and chores for the children. But tonight, for these last few minutes of December 25th, the house is still held in the grip of something special. The last candle flickers and goes out. Father banks the fire, covering the coals with ash, so they'll last through the night and provide starter coals for tomorrow's fires. Mother gathers the candle stubs to be saved and melted down for next year. They climb the stairs together, checking on the children. All three asleep, covers pulled up, wooden horse and ragdoll and journal safely tucked nearby, and then retreat to their own room. And the house settles into darkness, into silence, into the deep winter quiet that will hold until dawn, when the whole exhausting, beautiful cycle starts again. Not Christmas anymore, just ordinary December 26th. But for one day, for this day, they made something worth remembering, something simple and profound and utterly their own. And that's where we'll leave them tonight. A family in the 1850s, at the very end of their Christmas day, tucked into beds piled with quilts, the house slowly cooling around them, the smell of pine and goose fat and beeswax still lingering in rooms that tomorrow will return to their everyday rhythms. There's something deeply restful about stepping back through that door, isn't there? Seeing how celebration used to be smaller, slower, more deliberately crafted. How a single orange could be treasure. How hours of cooking translated into moments of genuine connection. How the absence of convenience somehow created space for presence. It's not that their way was better. Those women were exhausted. Those children went to bed with perpetually cold feet, and we shouldn't romanticize hardship. But maybe they understood something we're still trying to relearn, that meaning doesn't scale with abundance, that joy lives in attention rather than accumulation, that the best gifts often cost nothing but time and care and the willingness to be fully where you are. So as you drift off tonight, maybe carry that with you. The image of candlelight on evergreen boughs, the sound of voices raised in familiar songs, the simple, profound gift of people choosing to be together, to work together, to celebrate together, even when, especially when, it's difficult. Rest easy, friends. Tomorrow's just another day, but tonight, for a little while, you've touched something timeless. Sweet dreams.